Hey guys, welcome inside the Guilty as Charged podcast presented by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Joining me today for a special interview is Mr. Daniel Popper of The Athletic. Daniel, thanks for taking the time to join me. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
I am happy to have you. Before we get started on all the football talk, I got to ask you, man, how was that burrito yesterday that you experienced in downtown LA?
It was phenomenal. Yeah, it was a surf and turf burrito from Sonoritas, right outside Staples Center, and it definitely improved my day, which was a little bit stressful because I was buying a car and I needed to go get something delicious to improve my mood, and that burrito certainly achieved that.
I will definitely be putting that place on my list next time I'm down in LA. So that's a good one. So when I messaged you about this interview, I obviously had not planned to be leading this interview with kickers, but of course that is kind of the hot topic around Southern California and the Chargers. What did you make of the decision to bring in Dustin Hopkins specifically, and do you think he's a legitimate upgrade long term for this team?
Yeah, so as soon as I saw Dustin Hopkins got released by Washington last week, it was something that definitely popped up on my radar just because he's the kind of guy that they would sign if they were going to make a change at kicker, just somebody with experience. Obviously, was the Washington kicker since 2015, he's kicked the playoff games, made a lot of kicks in this league, an above average kicker, in his tenure with Washington, particularly in kicks 45 yards and longer. So he was a guy that I had my eyes on. And they brought him in for a workout yesterday and they made the change. Ultimately, it comes down to experience. Like they need a guy there that they can rely on. I mean, at the very base level to rely on to make extra points in
Right.
key moments. And, I felt like in the Browns game, that extra point that Tristan Vizcaino missed wasn't talked about as much because the Chargers came back and won. It was all about the offensive performance, 47 points, Justin Herbert, all the stuff. He missed that kick and they almost lost the game because of that.
Yeah.
And I think it just got to a point where it was untenable. You can't have the guy can be the most talented kicker in the entire world, but if he's not making kicks, he's not going to last long in the NFL. You need a guy that you can rely on in those situations, and they can't rely on Tristan Vizcaino right now. Now, the plan is to sign him back to the practice squad and continue to groom him and grow him, and maybe he's the Chargers kicker down the line. But for right now, this is a 4-2 ball club. They're a good football team. They got a chance to make the playoffs, and the last thing you want is to have the talent and performance there on offense and defense, and not have a kicker who can make the kicks to win you football games. And that's really what it came down to. And they needed a guy in there that they could rely on, and Dustin Hopkins provides that in terms of experience in this league.
Yeah, and I think that is a huge thing as well. And I looked back at, he had some really clutch kicks for them last year for the Washington football team down the stretch, specifically against the Steelers to kind of, catapult their win streak and win the division. So I think this is going to be a positive move as well. And obviously the Chargers did bring in Andre Roberts to shore up the return position. What do you think we can expect from him? I know the numbers from this particular season with Houston aren't, exactly shining in comparison to his last few seasons. Do you think that he will be able to kind of recapture the magic for the Chargers this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if recapture the magic is it's sort of the level that you're looking for, but he's a qualified NFL returner.
Yeah.
Like they were throwing guys back there who were not qualified to do the job. KJ Hill was reliable, but there were just so many instances where he looked indecisive back there, was letting balls, drop in front of him. He's not a really explosive player, so he's not giving you a big punch in terms of punt returns. But the bigger issue for the Chargers was really kick returns. Um,
Yeah.
it never really made sense why they were putting Larry Roundtree back there. The guy runs a 4.70, and I know Darius Swinton talked to us about how they liked his physicality, and if he got a head of steam, there weren't going to be a lot of guys who wanted to tackle him. That philosophy didn't pan out. I mean, you sort of hone in on what you're looking for in a kick returner. The first thing you want is speed, right? Like
Right.
he's one of the slowest skill players they have, and they're putting him back there at kick returner. It just didn't come to fruition. And just some numbers that I pulled in my bye week story. They were last. This was through 6 weeks. They were last in the league in average yards per kick return at 16 and a half. And they were also last in average starting field position off kickoffs at the 20.9 yard line. I mean, you get to the 25 on a touchback. So like, how bad do you have to
Yeah.
be averaging inside the 21 yard line? And so it was two pronged. They wanted somebody more experienced and explosive on punt return, but I think the real issue was kick return. They needed somebody back there with some experience who could at least give them like league average performance there and improve that starting point. Because you have a great offense, but you're going to hamstring your great offense if they're starting deep inside their own territory. And one thing that Brandon Staley brings up a lot that I hadn't thought about before, a lot of things he brings up I hadn't thought about before he
Right.
said them. But one thing he brought up is like, that's a huge momentum play, right?
Yeah.
Like if you are, you're coming off giving up a touchdown or points, unless it's the start of a half. And so there's already some momentum going against you. The other team kicks off, you return it, and there's a huge hit there where your guys stopped at the 16-yard line. That's like that gives your defense juice. The sidelines
Right.
erupting, and that was happening over and over again. So your offense is going out there, back not only backed up, but everyone on the opposing side is completely charged up because of the hit that was laid on your kick returner because you don't have anybody back there with any juice. So it was a good move. And I think with both of these moves on special teams, you're seeing a coaching staff that is going to make changes if stuff isn't working. I think that's the biggest like overarching takeaway from these two moves is they're not going to stand pat and just accept mediocrity or even below average play from anybody. They're going to be aggressive and make moves when there are moves to be made. And luckily for the Chargers, two experienced veterans came available, and
Right.
Andre Roberts as a kick returner and Dustin Hopkins as a kicker, and they made the moves. And if you're a Chargers fan, you have to be excited about that because special teams have been so bad around here in recent years, and this is evidence that Brandon Staley is saying, "Listen, like we are not going to be content with having the 31st ranked special teams in the league. Like we're going to make moves to improve our special teams as the season goes on. It's not just limited to the off season."
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you spend any time on Football Outsiders, right? Like the punt team is fine, the kickoff team is fine. It's just those two kickoff return units and field goal / extra point units were not very good. So I think this will give them a boost. And like we've been saying all summer long, like just get to close to average and we'll be happy.
Yeah.
If Andre Roberts can get to the 25 consistently, we'll be thrilled.
Right. And it's overall too, like just if they can get to like the 24th or 23rd
Yeah.
ranked special teams, whether it's EPA, whether it's Football Outsiders, DVOA, however you want to slice it, if they can get into that range, then they're fine. You can win a Super Bowl. You can contend for the playoffs with that kind of special teams. When you're hovering at 31, 32 in EPA and in DVOA, which is where they're at right now, they're 31st. That's not good. And like you said, I totally agree with you. Punt coverage has been fine. Kickoff coverage has been fine. They probably can improve a little bit on kickoff coverage, but they got a lot of young players playing there who
Right.
are only going to get better. And you see flashes like Chris Rumph has made some plays. Nick Neiman has made some plays. Those guys are only going to get better as they get more snaps. But you need a kicker you can trust, and you need a return guy with some juice. And that's really, what they're hoping will spur them from bottom of the league to, closer to that 25, 24 range in some of those
Yeah.
in some of those rankings. Yeah.
Absolutely. Really quickly before we move on from special teams, do you think Roberts will be used much, at least initially, as a receiver? Because KJ Hill wasn't exactly getting, a ton of snaps or anything like that.
No, I wouldn't expect him to get any snaps on offense.
Okay. Well, there we go. One of the, I mean, that's kind of been his career. So I was just kind of curious
Yeah.
if they had any other plans. I mean, I know Brandon Staley was asked about it today, but, you're just, I mean, your fifth receiver is, not getting snaps, which I think is just, that's a story for another time.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, obviously, that has been, much maligned on Twitter, on all the broadcast shows, is the run defense. Brandon Staley said on Monday that, the front mechanics and the techniques are not, being taught well enough or coached well enough. Is it really that simple? And I know Justin Jones is on track to come back this week, because this is another area where I feel like if you could get this to, like in the 20s as opposed to worst in the league, that would
Yeah.
obviously help the Chargers' long-term outlook. So how do they fix this issue is my question.
Yeah, it's bad. I mean, they are far and away the worst run defense in the league, regardless of what statistic you're looking at.
Right.
They're last in EPA, they're last in DVOA. I'm pretty sure they've given up the most rushing yards or had given up the most rushing yards in the league. So, however, whatever stat you like, they're bad.
Yeah.
So it's kind of layered, right? I think initially the first thing that jumps out is they've played some really good rushing teams. The Browns, Ravens, Cowboys, all top 10 rushing offenses in DVOA. The Ravens and Browns are both top 5 rushing offenses. So when you go up against a team with a strength like that and your biggest weakness is your run defense, is going to get exposed. So I think going up against some worse run offenses will be better and will help improve it. Getting Justin Jones back obviously will help improve it, but it's a talent issue. And when when a coach is putting the emphasis on himself and saying, I need to do better, you can look at that and say, okay, the coach isn't going to go up there and say, I don't have talented enough players, right? He's not going to say
Right.
that, but I can say that because I watched the film and I heading into the season, I saw it as a weakness. They were one injury away from it being an issue. You can go back to my mailbag in July and read me explicitly
Yeah.
saying that Justin Jones is an injury-prone player. Their first three guys are good, but if Justin Jones gets injured, they're in trouble. And that's exactly what's happened. It
Right.
wasn't hard to see that this was going to be an issue. So how do they fix it? Getting Justin Jones back will help. Playing worse run offenses will help, but they just need more out of the players they have. And I think that's sort of what Staley is getting at. Like, is he getting the absolute most out of the players he has? The answer to that is no right now. And so can he simplify things? Can he define things in a different way to get more out of players? And let's name names, right? Like Jerry Tillery has not been good against the run. He has not
He
been
is
good. Like
not.
I agree. I think Staley's analysis today was spot on. Like he's given you some juice as a pass rusher, which he's always going to do. He's a pretty decent pass rusher. I think he's ranks 72nd or something in pass rush productivity on PFF among all defensive players with qualified snaps, pass rushing snaps. So he's been fine. He's been a factor there. In the run defense though, he's just not consistent enough. He doesn't play with enough physicality. Um, I don't know if it's an effort issue. I don't know if it's a technique issue. I don't know what it is, but there isn't a consistency there from him in terms of eating up blocks, which is what Brandon Staley is asking of his defensive linemen. And so that's a big issue. Can you get more out of Jerry Tillery? Asking for more out of Linval Joseph at this point, I don't think makes a lot of sense. I think he's giving you everything he has,
Yeah.
but he's 33 years old and he's on the back end of his career. So asking him to be a all pro level player at this point is not realistic. And you signed Christian Covington as a rotational guy. So, him playing like 20 to 22 snaps a game, that's ideal. He's going to give you something there as a fourth defensive lineman, but asking him to play 40 plus snaps a game, that's just not who he is as a player. That's not why they signed him. And so you're seeing the depth issues come to light. There's reason to believe it will improve because they're getting Justin Jones back. Drew Tranquil's back, and they're not going to be playing the Browns, Ravens, and Cowboys every single week. But the talent is what it is. So expecting a massive jump in the run defense over the remainder of the season, I don't think that's realistic either.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what the snap rotation turns out to be once Jones is back because I mean, Tillery's at 133 snaps against the run, and so is Linval Joseph. And that seems like, kind of the tip top of what you want these players to be. So I'm curious to see how Jones fits in there. And I know Brandon Staley said today that he views Christian Covington as, a pseudo starter. But I mean, Justin Jones, like he said today, was playing really well in the Washington game before he got injured.
Yeah, Covington won't start. It'll be those three: Tillery, Joseph, and Jones, and then Covington will go back into his fourth defensive lineman role, playing like what I was saying about 20-25 snaps a game. And they'll get more out of him in that situation. But I think asking him to play more, you know, and Staley brought it up today. If they hadn't made that signing, they would have been in deep trouble. So
Yes.
even if he hasn't played an extremely high level, like he's given them some level of competence in their defensive line. Whereas if they were forced to go to, Joe Gaziano or Braden Fajoko or Forrest Merrill for those kinds of snaps, they would have been in a much worse place.
Yeah. Absolutely. I wanted to talk about the early down offense as well because Brandon Staley talked quite a bit about it today. Of course, you asked him about it. He mentioned a couple of times that it has been some kind of execution issues that he thinks the issues are a little bit more, minor than people are potentially making them out to be. Where do you land on that? Because I know a lot of people on Twitter have been frustrated at, like the screen passes on first down or like the screen passes on second down. And I guess my question to you is, do you think the first down and second down issues will kind of even out if they kind of keep doing what they're doing? Or is there like a legitimate play calling issue with the offense right now?
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far to say that it's like a legitimate play calling issue. I think there are things to tighten up across the board. The whole goal is to not be in third and long, and they've been in too
Right.
many third and longs. I mean, that came through in the Ravens game, and you just can't rely on your offense to convert on third down time after time after time. The interesting thing was this was a point of emphasis for the organization going into the season. Like they knew that they had to be better on early downs, particularly on first down, because they were relying on Justin Herbert to make these plays on third down. That was really the engine of the offense last year. And they kind of ended up in a similar place. They're through 6 weeks, they were the top team on third down in the league, third and fourth down in the league, I think, or first or second in the league. They were among the best teams in the league in that area, and 24th in EPA per play on first and second down. So I think better play calling will set them up better. I think a more consistent rushing attack will set them up better. But again, you go back and you look and you're like, okay, the right side of that offensive line is a weak point, and how much more are you going to get out of Michael Schofield? How much more can you get out of Storm Norton? If everyone knows you're running left every single time, that's not a really great
Right.
recipe. So, and then you need better execution from your players. So it's really all around. Like, I don't think you can say, oh, the early down efficiency is bad because Joe Lombardi hasn't been calling good plays. I don't think that's accurate. I think it falls on everybody. The play calling can be better. The execution can be better. And we'll see what happens here as it moves forward. But it's definitely something that we've talked about a lot. It's something that needs to improve because if you're relying on your third down and fourth down offense all season, it's going to come back to bite you. We saw that in the Ravens game. You go up against a good defense that gets really multiple on third downs, that can send simulated pressures and do all these different things with their personnel packages. It can really hamstring your offense on third down. So it's a point of emphasis, and I'm really sort of fascinated to see what sort of changes they make to improve in that area.
Yeah, and I think another fascinating area, which we will see this Sunday, is Bill Belichick and his defense last year really gave the Chargers fits on third down and longs, and so if this is a big kind of put your money where your mouth is game against Bill Belichick in a very complex and disciplined defense. What are your early thoughts about that matchup, specifically Chargers offense versus Patriots defense?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing Bill Belichick does, and he's done it his whole career, is attack your weak points. He takes away your best player, and then he attacks your weak points. And I would be worried about what Bill Belichick is going to do to the right side of that offensive line. Last year an interesting game plan because they got a ton of pressure and just hit Justin Herbert a bunch, but they really didn't blitz. It was
Right.
all four-man pressures and a ton of stunts, and Dan Feeney just had a really tough time handling a lot of that stuff, and really all of the offensive linemen up there in that game, and that's a big reason why they lost 45-0. And we can get into all the special teams issues and that sort of thing. But um, I'm curious to see what Bill Belichick does in terms of who's he going to take away. Right? Is he going to try and
Mm,
take away Mike Williams, or is he going to try and take away Keenan Allen? The interesting thing is Mike Williams has been more of a focal point in the offense this year
yeah.
over Keenan Allen. So is that what Bill Belichick targets in terms of his coverage schemes, is taking away Mike Williams? And what does that mean for Keenan Allen? Or does he, go with the history and say Keenan Allen has been the more productive player and I'm going to take him away? And that might create opportunities for Mike Williams. So I'm interested in that. And then obviously, I would imagine it's going to be a similar approach in terms of the pass rush scheme. A lot of four-man rushes and then trying to
Mm,
use stunts and games to exploit the right side of that offensive line. Matching up Matthew Judon with Storm Norton and seeing what happens there in terms of that matchup. The Chargers have been helping Storm Norton a lot on the right side, and that's sort of they've been game planning
right.
protections for him. But that's really what I'm fascinated in, and what I'll be looking for in terms of that matchup and what Bill Belichick tries to do from a scheming perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that we get to see Matthew Judon against Rashawn Slater a little bit.
Yeah, I'm
Slater's been
sure we'll see some of
obviously,
that. Yeah.
yeah, Slater's been awesome to watch. It's been, he's been holding his own down there for sure. On the opposite side of the ball, obviously we talked about the run defense already. You can talk about that again if you want. What kind of stands out to you about the Patriots offense right now?
Yeah, I mean, Bill, again, going back to Bill Belichick scheming, he's going to attack your weak points. And so I would fully expect the Patriots to come out and try and run the ball until the Chargers prove they can stop it.
Yeah,
Um, but in terms of the passing attack, it's going to be really interesting because the Chargers have gone up against a lot of, more mobile quarterbacks, guys that can get outside the pocket, whether it's Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, even Dak, right? Um, Derek Carr is no slouch and moving around the pocket. Taylor Heineke, like, they played a lot of guys that can create. Mac Jones is not that quarterback. So what does that mean for the pass rushers? And something Brandon Staley brought up today that was really interesting is, like, they haven't had a lot of true rush situations.
yeah,
Some of that has been the scheme in terms of trying to contain these guys in the pocket. Some of that has been just the rush defense not getting it done in the early downs and setting up a lot of third and four and less. And so those aren't really pass rushing situations. Can they get to those situations against Mac Jones and this offense? The run defense will have to perform, but if they do get in those situations, you don't really have a mobile quarterback back there. So do we see a breakout game from this pass rush from Joey Bosa? Do we finally see Uchenna Nwosu come through? I think that could certainly happen, but it starts with the run defense, right? You need to put yourself in those positions by stopping the run on first and second down, and setting up the third and longs that allow Joey Bosa and Uchenna Nwosu, Kyler Fackrell, all these guys to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback.
yeah. That's absolutely a good call. I think Uchenna has been solid.
Yeah.
Obviously that's not been a popular take on Twitter right now.
Yeah,
But I
so
think
so
Uchenna
let,
has been
let's
solid.
get into this for a second because you're more plugged in with the fan base. Like, why do people think Uchenna Nwosu isn't playing well? Is it just they look at the sack numbers and they're like, oh, he doesn't have 10 sacks, so he sucks? Like, what's
I think that's part of it. I also think that there are a lot of fans who, if you're not like great, you're terrible. And so, like, someone today was saying that like they should be starting Kyler Fackrell. Like Kyler Fackrell should be like the guy getting the most reps. And it's like they're like the same player. Like Uchenna's like a little bit better, a little bit more productive, but Kyler is not a significant upgrade either. I think Chenna's been solid.
yeah. Yeah, I think the context is important, right? Like he hasn't gotten many true rushes.
No.
That's what you have to look at. Like situationally, like you can't just say, okay, this guy doesn't have a lot of sacks or a lot of pressures, he sucks. It's like, well, how many third and longs have they had? How many
Yeah.
situations have they had where opposing teams are facing that situation and these pass rushers can actually pin their ears back and get after the quarterback? It
Right.
hasn't been that much because they can't stop the run. So it's all tied together. Uchenna Nwosu is playing really well. The production isn't there, so maybe he's not setting himself up for a massive contract, but he's doing his job at a high level. He's creating pressure. I think it's more of a situational thing for all these pass rushers. Joey Bosa isn't, having his typical season, right? I think he's outside
No.
the top 10 in pressures and pass rush
Yeah.
productivity. He's usually a top 5 guy in that area. It's all situational. If you can't stop the run, you're not going to get chances to get after the quarterback, and that's going to affect your productivity as a pass rusher.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that I haven't like really focused in on the Baltimore film on the defensive side of things, but I know against the Chiefs, like you could tell that Nwosu and Fackrell were really not like going after Mahomes. Like that was Bosa's thing, and the opposite edge rusher was really kind of cage rushing to make sure that Mahomes was not getting out of the pocket on that side. So that's the
Right.
other thing that really stood out to me about that specific game. And I'm sure you probably can watch the film against the Ravens and see the same thing. Is that they really it seems like they like to have one of the opposite edge rushers more do a cage rush and keep the quarterbacks inside the pocket.
Right. And that's what I was sort of getting at, right? Like
Yeah,
you face all these mobile quarterbacks where the number one priority is make sure they don't escape laterally. And
yeah,
so you're not going right after the quarterback. You're not taking your typical angles after the quarterback. You're rushing upfield and trying to, create that seal on both sides. That's certainly what happened in the Chiefs game. And so you factor that all together, the quarterbacks they've been facing, the inability to stop the run and set themselves up in third and long, and that they just haven't had that many opportunities to go get the quarterback. And I think that's showing up in the production.
yeah. And like still despite that, like I think for Nwosu in particular, like he's staying healthy and he's giving you two or three pressures a game. Like, I mean, that is the pass rush win rate for him is down a little bit this year because he's playing more, but like he's on pace for like 35 pressures, 5 or 6 sacks. Like that's solid. Those are solid numbers for your second rusher.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's been fine. I don't think he's taken the leap that maybe I think maybe it was expectations, right? I think everyone was
Sure.
sort of saying, "Oh, he's finally going to get playing time, and now he's going to emerge as an elite pass rusher." But I think those expectations were too high. If you had reasonable
Mhm.
expectations for Uchenna Nwosu, I think he's met them given all of the context that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. That was a great discussion. So we'll get you out of here on this one. Obviously, the
Okay.
Chargers kind of exceeded expectations in their first six. I think we can agree on that one. Their next six games, I don't know if you've got the schedule down, but just so for our listeners, of course, you've got the Patriots this week, Eagles the week after that, then the Vikings, Steelers, Broncos, and Bengals in week 13. So how do the Chargers make sure that they exceed expectations again in their next 6 weeks?
Yeah, I think it's addressing the issues that we talked about, right? I think it's defensively finding a way to improve the run defense. Like that is the top priority defensively because they're a good pass defense. Like they're a
Yeah.
top 10 pass defense in the league in DVOA. They've really done a good job of limiting explosive passes, but they've given up this is through 6 weeks because I haven't looked at a lot of the numbers after week 7, but through 6 weeks they had allowed the most explosive runs in the league. So it's not that just that they're allowing like
Gosh.
1 and 2 yard runs to turn into 5 yard runs. They're
Right.
allowing 1 and 2 yard runs to turn into 52-yard touchdowns, right? Like, and so across the board, like the line hasn't been good enough. The linebackers haven't tackled well enough, and the corners and safeties haven't tackled well enough. It's a group effort to produce that kind of run defense, and so that has to improve if they're going to continue to win football games. And then offensively, it's what we talked about earlier. The main priority has to be better early down efficiency to take some of the stress off of Justin Herbert in these third downs. That means more creative play calling on first and second down, easier completions, and figuring out a way to run the ball more consistently.
Yeah, completely agree. Great stuff today from Mr. Daniel Popper. You can find him on Twitter, of course. I assume most of our listeners are following you. But Pop, what do you have coming up on the Athletic this weekend or in the coming weeks?
Yes, I got a mailbag coming Friday, and then we'll have full coverage of the Patriots game. I'll be there obviously at SoFi, so I'll have takeaways off the game. I've been doing these final thoughts after we talked to
Mhm.
Staley on Monday, where I just kind of word vomit everything I'm thinking about the game, just to tie all the knots up, and then we'll get to our film review next week as well after a brief reprieve here for the bye week. But yeah, all sorts of content coming your way.
Awesome. Can't wait to take part in that. Daniel, thank you for taking the time to join us today.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.